Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
In June of 1969, 21-year-old Nora McCorvey discovered she was pregnant with her third child, which she was not prepared to have. However, she was living in Texas, a state with some of the strictest abortion laws in the country, only allowing abortions in cases which jeopardized the life of the mother. While trying to find a way to rid herself of her baby, either through abortion or adoption, she was referred by her adoption attorney to lawyers Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey. In 1970, Weddington and Coffey filed suit in a U.S. District Court in Texas on behalf of McCorvey under the alias Jane Roe. The defendant in the case was Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade, who represented the state of Texas. The case eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court and was decided in favor of Roe on January 22, 1973, legalizing abortion in the United States and asserting that a pregnant woman has a fundamental right to obtain an abortion. Due to its controversial nature, the decision made in Roe v. Wade was a major turning point in the socio-political atmosphere of the United States through the development of an abortion debate, igniting culture war. According to tradition carried over from England, abortions performed before the mother felt fetal movement in the uterus, known as quickening, was not a crime. In 1821, Connecticut adopted the first law banning abortion before quickening, and soon after, abortions became largely legal nationwide. On April 25, 1967, the governor of Colorado, John Love, signed the first liberalized abortion law in the United States, and by the end of 1972, a total of 13 states had similar laws. There were even Southern Baptist leaders converting in favor of abortion rights. For instance, Dr. W.A. Griswold's pro-choice argument was that life did not begin until a baby took his or her first breath. In the 1960s, both the Democratic and Republican parties held moderate pro-life views on abortion. However, as the abortion debate and the women's rights movement gained strength, the electorate's opinion began to polarize. Between 1960 and 1972, even as public support for decriminalization was continuing to grow, a political conflict over abortion began, with the Catholic Church predominantly leading opposition to abortion decriminalization. Even as Catholics were working to build institutions and arguments against abortion, abortion's very identification as a Catholic voting issue made it of interest to strategists for both political parties during the 1972 presidential campaign. Abortion was beginning to find a place in national party politics. On January 22, 1973, the United States Supreme Court issued its ruling in Roe v. Wade, which found that the constitutional right to privacy was broad enough to encompass abortion rights. In the first trimester, states could not enact any regulation to protect the fetus. In the second trimester, states could enact some regulation, but only for the purpose of protecting maternal health. In the third trimester, even after viability, states could, but were not required to, prescribe abortion, provided it made exceptions to preserve the life and health of a woman seeking an abortion.
When I hear arguments by intelligent, zealous, well-meaning people, both in favor of a woman's right to choose and against a woman's right to choose, I always think of the old story of the rabbi who was conducting court in Eastern Europe, and he heard the husband's version of why the marriage was terrible and said to the husband, "You know, my son, you're right." And then he heard the wife's version, and he says to the wife, "You know, my daughter, you're right." And then the rabbinical student says, "But Rabbi, they both can't be right." And the rabbi said, "You know, my son, you're right." Everybody is right when it comes to the issue of abortion.
The decision made in Roe v. Wade divided the nation into two distinct segments, pro-life and pro-choice. The public's division over abortion stems from conflicting views on personal freedom, a right to privacy, and a right to religious or moral convictions surrounding the belief that life begins at conception. These factors, in combination, result in broad definitions for the terms pro-life and pro-choice that account for the large middle ground present in American opinions on abortion. Although 42% of Americans identify themselves as pro-choice, only 22% of the population supports abortion for any reason during the first trimester of pregnancy. Furthermore, 63% of Americans feel that abortion is morally wrong. The overlap between these two groups implies that the way that the issue is defined by many Americans encompasses both sides of the argument, morally objecting to the notion of abortion, yet recognizing the idea of an individual's right to choose. Both sides of the abortion debate have rooted their argument in fundamental human rights. The view that abortion should be illegal generally rests on the claims that the existence and moral right to life of human beings begins at conception, that induced abortion is the deliberate and unjust killing of the embryo in violation of its right to life, and that the law should prohibit unjust violations of the right to life. The pro-choice view on abortion generally rests on the claim that women have a right to control what happens in and to their own bodies, and that abortion is just an exercise of this right. Due to extreme fanaticism and social protest over the abortion issue, violent incidents directed against abortion providers, from the murders and attempted murders of physicians and clinic staff to the arson and bombing of abortion clinics, have occurred many times in the past 40 years. The Supreme Court generally supported states' efforts to protect the clinics and those working in or attending them through the use of buffer zones and other means. But the fact that this kind of violence occurred indicates a hard opposition to abortion held by some Americans, especially those who are willing to commit a crime to prevent what they consider a crime, the abortion of an unborn child.
I believe that until and unless someone can establish that the unborn child is not a living human being, then that child is already protected by the Constitution, which guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all of us.
Since Roe was an extremely controversial decision, it provided grounds for continued social and political dialogue. Following the decision, both major political parties formalized their general consensus regarding abortion in their party platforms, with the Democrats becoming pro-choice and the Republicans becoming pro-life. In turn, abortion became a significant wedge issue in American politics, as these attitudes led people to switch parties asymmetrically, and ideological identities began to affect partisanship on the abortion issue. Although anti-abortion groups were active prior to 1973, the legalization of abortions provided a tremendous outgrowth for the pro-life movement. This case, and the overturning of most anti-abortion laws, spurred the growth of a largely religious-based anti-abortion political and social movement, even as Americans were becoming, in the 1970s and 80s, increasingly pro-choice. Instead of a debate over whether or not abortion should be legal, the issue became what restrictions should be placed on the right to abortion. The first major pro-life success following Roe's case came in 1976 with the passing of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibited the use of specific federal funds for abortions. And in Harris v. McRae, pro-life advocates won a 1980 challenge to the Hyde Amendment. Pro-life and pro-choice groups were invigorated by each other's successes, as the Hyde Amendment spurred the pro-choice movement to greater action and helped groups like Planned Parenthood increase their membership. In this way, the strength of each side shifted with the outcome of each battle. That same year, the anti-abortion movement gained control of the GOP's platform committee, adding pro-life planks to the Republican position and calling for a human life amendment to the U.S. Constitution, banning abortion. By the early 1980s, the Republicans were laboring under the weight of a single-issue religious test for heresy: abortion. 3 pro-life U.S. presidents, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush, have been elected since the decision, with one of the deciding factors in each election being the moral tumultuary of the abortion issue. A recent point of contention arose in the spring of 2012 between Catholic and other religious employers who, on the basis of religious or moral opposition, did not provide health insurance coverage that included contraception or abortion-inducing drugs. The recent healthcare bill, nicknamed Obamacare, mandates private employers to provide such coverage. Politically, the abortion issue is a question of personal privacy rights. The laws in the books and subsequent court decisions relating to them have, over time, been tied to 2 questions: whether women have a right to obtain abortions, and at what point does an unborn child have a claim to rights of its own. Due to the political differences of the 2 parties regarding abortion, the issue has played a major role in every election where 2 members of the competing parties are running against each other. Roe v. Wade greatly affected the United States, as it created a stronger political divide between the 2 parties and insinuated a cultural war between the pro-life and pro-choice groups in America. The American public has struggled with a moral divide over abortion for decades. The moral aspect of this issue is what makes it so difficult to resolve. The critical question that fuels this debate is, when does life begin? This issue has inspired marches and murder, and spawned a set of competing interest groups that have raised tens of millions of dollars a year to influence public opinion and voting behavior. By dividing the nation, it has set in place a modern culture war between 2 conflicting groups: those who believe in the right to life, and those who believe in the right to choose.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above.